question that we may have, but then it's some things that we have to address, that I would say service by service, country by country.
Pete, do you want to? Mario, anything?
Yes.
Go ahead. Okay. Well, our experience with regulatory bodies has been quite a scene, and I would agree that it's one of the biggest difficulties for companies like us to go into countries that have had monopolies established for years, and the regulatory entity is either new or is it very much into a relationship with the existing incumbent. So I would think that we would proceed to the way that we have done is to establish a good relationship with a regulatory body, with frequent meetings, and have also a social contract with the people of the country to realize that the new services provided, or that the entrance of competition is something that they should welcome, and therefore put pressure onto the regulatory body or political body to act accordingly. The fact that at least the countries where we operate on are under a good amount of WTO scrutiny, so that is another mechanism through which you can accomplish what is fair for the competitive environment in the countries where you operate. Even under those circumstances, we've had curveballs thrown at us by the regulatory bodies in these countries, and we deal with them one at a time.
Okay, I think I could probably speak here for at least an hour on regulatory.
I figured you would.
I think the biggest thing, I'm going to steal from one of the campaigns for president right now, we need a environment for change. I think from Network IP's perspective, is seen as an entrepreneur in the telecom space, which if you look back in 1996 in the US, when Congress really created the Reform Act for Telecom, went to the FCC and said, we want to create an environment for entrepreneurs to evolve technology and evolve this space. And right now I'd give them probably a failing grade from the perspective of really supporting business models. There has been, even in our case, everything from USF to, every place you touch the FCC, they're stuck in the 1970s. They just can't seem to pull their head up to realize that when you enable technologies, you've also got to look at enabling business models. And so I think that's one of our struggles has been, is every time we turn around, there's some other rule or some other thing that they've come up with or want to interpret as if it was 1975. So I think from our perspective, that's been a challenge, and of course you take them one at a time.
From a regulatory perspective, one country, 50 states, so it doesn't get any easier when you have a single, what appears to be a single governing body. It's actually, with you throwing in the PUCs, introducing another level of complexity and challenges. But I would summarize really 4 specific issues. One is net neutrality, and will the market forces be allowed to prevail, or will something else be regulated? Voice over IP, after continued now many years, despite uncertainty which has slowed, has certainly not prevented, but despite the uncertainty, there's obviously a continued push for voice over IP. But gaining certainty in what ultimately will come with voice over IP vis-a-vis as well inter-carrier compensation. The next also is going more to the investment piece, is continued treatment or availability of unbundled network elements. With regard to the access networks, the continued opportunity with new technologies, namely mid-band Ethernet, being able to utilize the copper infrastructure and provide new age services, namely bundling copper dia zeros and creating 10 meg plus Ethernet connections to small, medium businesses, and in some cases even residential locations, certainly provides an opportunity, but without, again, availability of copper and certainty on the treatment of unis, there's just that uncertainty. And then finally, I think that was mentioned as USF. Less so with regard to investment, but again, just a continuing issue, a long list of issues that presents challenges as you formulate business models.
I won't get into specific policies, just because they'll be more Canadian specific and not as relevant for the audience, I don't think. But I would just say generally, we're proponents and supporters of allowing market forces to rule and to allow markets to be created through market forces as a result of market engineering. I just think that as we look at the past, primarily more closed-based systems, the market engineering has, in certain cases, been somewhat successful, in certain cases, been completely disastrous. And so I think the less we get into that environment, the better it is for everybody. And I think the only other one I would raise is that regulation that's tied to subsidizing incumbent positions is unhelpful in the long term, because it basically just makes you less competitive over time, and it's really not reflective of the environment we're about to move into, which is a more hyper-competitive environment where everybody's going to be kind of in everybody's space in one form or another. And if we do have artificial subsidies in the system, that will create problems for the people who are being subsidized, whether or not they realize it in the long term or not.
Okay, Danny, raise your hand for a minute. Give Danny the microphone, because this is a question I know. Danny is one of the top pro-competition attorneys in the United States. I mean, he's been at this for a long time, and he says he was shocked this morning to learn that I actually no longer like Reed Hunt's approach as much as some of the others, so we know exactly where we stand, although I've been on Danny's side and of course am fully supportive of market-based competition. But one of the odd things, looking back on the Telecom Act of '96, which was the major deregulation legislation in the US, is most people on the competitive side of the business would say that the act has failed. I mean, that's almost universally what I hear from people, right? It just simply has failed. The bell companies own everything. Nothing has changed. Now, I would ask you, though, if you talk to any live human being, most of us would say we've got more choice, better prices, more services than we ever had before. So you have to sort of then explain that. I mean, maybe we do have a regulation regime that has failed in terms of promoting competition. I mean, and it's arguable, but you could clearly make that argument. On the other hand, most of us kind of think things are better than they used to be. How do we square these things? And in terms of what the panelists have said this morning, obviously we have a clash here. There's no way to get around it. The Tier 1 providers want certain things. Competitors don't want those things, and there's just no way to get around this. So where are we, Danny?
Well, I think is this on? Yeah. I think you have to think of yourself as either a consumer, like a residential consumer, or a business consumer, for one thing. And the other is, I think technology has continued to outpace the positive effects of competition, and technology on competition have outpaced the negative effects of regulators. So the first 5 years of the '96 Act, the Reed Hunt era that you've now abandoned, was very pro-competitive, adopted a lot of pro-competitive rules, had a lot of billions of dollars of investment money flowed in. The bell companies managed to beat that back through litigation, which always happens for some period of time, but they held it off long enough for the election to create a different administration, which basically made the deal we were talking about last night of deciding that they wanted to see broadband deployed, and the only companies that had the money to do that in the short term, i.e. the political short term, was the Bell system. So they basically agreed to dismantle the pro-competitive rules of the late '90s in order to let broadband deployment come in, and that's why you see today the cable versus telco broadband fight, and basically nobody else in it at the residential level. I mean, even we can probably all remember the old days of nonstop MCI and AT&T and Sprint long distance ads on television. Now you haven't seen one in 5 years because there isn't any competition anymore, other than with the cable companies on the VoIP side. So I would say that competition exists basically on the software side. I think you and I may disagree on net neutrality, because I understand your point about wanting to prioritize packets to enable certain services, but it just pulls you right back. When you do that, pulls you right back into the issue of pricing those things, the priority services, and whether that allows for anti-competitive activity.
We probably agree on net neutrality, actually.
Oh, maybe so.
Yeah. I don't think there should be any blocking ever for any reason. But traffic shaping is absolutely something you've got to do. Carlos also wants the microphone.
Carlos Da Silva from Telecom Orange. I have to